If you walked into a police station in London in 1842 and tried to report a mystery, you would quickly realize something terrifying. The police had absolutely no way to help you. They didn't interview witnesses, they didn't analyze crime scenes, and they didn't follow clues. In fact, in the spring of 1842, the Metropolitan Police did not employ a single detective. To the Victorian mind, the idea of a police officer wearing normal clothes and hunting down citizens in secret wasn't just un-English. It was a dangerous threat to human rights. They believed a state spy network was far more dangerous than any local criminal. But in April of that year, a brutal coachman named Daniel Good committed a crime so calculated that it completely broke the system. It triggered a chaotic, panicky week-long manhunt that left disguised police officers running blindly through the dark alleys of Spitalfields, always one step behind. By the time the dust settled, the government was forced to make a radical choice: change the law or let the criminals rule the city. To understand why London was so completely defenseless against a fleeing killer, you have to look at how early Victorian society viewed the concept of freedom. In 1842, the Metropolitan Police were a relatively new experiment, having been created just 13 years earlier in 1829. And from the very beginning, the public despised them. They were called Blue Devils and Peelers. To make them acceptable to a deeply skeptical British public, the government had to follow a strict, unwritten rule. The police must be completely visible at all times. They wore bright blue uniforms, top hats, and white trousers. They walked highly predictable beats, their heavy boots clanging loudly against the cobblestones. The philosophy was simple. The police were there to be a visual deterrent to street crime, not to act as an invisible hand of the state. If a major crime occurred, like a hidden murder or a complex theft, it was up to the victim to hire a private thief-taker, or for local magistrates to cobble together a temporary solution. The British public looked across the English Channel at France's hidden, plainclothes secret police and saw a dystopian nightmare. They believed that if a British police officer was allowed to hide their uniform and blend into a crowd, the government would inevitably use them to spy on political dissidents, violate civil liberties, and destroy privacy. The law, in its effort to protect the public from state overreach, had built a system that was intentionally blind to the shadows. And a man named Daniel Good was about to step directly into that blind spot. Daniel Good was a quiet, unassuming coachman working for a wealthy merchant in the affluent London suburb of Roehampton. To his neighbors, he was just another working-class laborer trying to get by. But behind the doors of his brick stable, a dark secret was festering. In early April 1842, a local shopkeeper reported that a boy's pair of trousers had been stolen, and suspicion fell on the coachman. A routine uniformed constable was dispatched to Good's stable to conduct a basic search for the missing clothing. It was supposed to be a minor, forgettable interaction, but as the constable rifled through the hay, he didn't find stolen clothing. Instead, his hands brushed against something heavy, wrapped tight in a coarse canvas sack. When the constable pulled back the fabric, the true horror of the stable was revealed. It was the concealed, brutalized torso of a woman, later identified as Jane Jones, Good's pregnant common-law wife. The constable froze. In 1842, uniformed beat cops were trained to handle drunkards, brawls, and petty thieves, but they had absolutely no training in securing a major crime scene or containing a high-risk suspect. Seizing the moment of the officer's sheer panic, Daniel Good didn't panic at all. He calmly backed toward the stable door, slammed it shut, turned the lock from the outside, and vanished into the dense London fog. By the time the constable managed to break out of the stable and raise the alarm, the killer had a massive head start. London was a sprawling metropolis of nearly 2 million people, and the police had just allowed a monster to slip right through their fingers. The escape of Daniel Good sent a shockwave straight to the highest levels of the British government. The Home Office realized that a brutal killer was loose in the capital, and the public was rapidly sliding into a state of panic. Newspapers began printing scathing editorials, demanding to know how a lone coachman could outsmart the law. Desperate to salvage their reputation, the heads of the Metropolitan Police decided to break their own foundational rules. They couldn't send uniformed officers to hunt Good. A man in a bright blue suit and a top hat would warn the fugitive from a mile away. So, they hastily threw together an ad hoc, experimental strategy. They selected a handful of uniformed constables, told them to strip off their official gear, and ordered them to put on civilian clothing. These men were transformed into disguised constables. But there was a fundamental flaw in this plan. Simply taking off a uniform does not make someone an investigator. These officers had spent their entire careers walking in straight lines, waiting for citizens to point out a criminal and making arrests under the clear light of day. They had never been trained in the art of tracking a human being. They didn't know how to follow a trail of blood, how to map out a suspect's psychological profile, or how to subtly extract information from an informant without blowing their cover. They were uniformed beat cops playing dress-up, thrust into the dark, labyrinthine underbelly of a metropolis that was cannibalizing itself. Armed with nothing but vague descriptions and raw desperation, this makeshift dragnet flooded the streets of London, blind to the fact that they were completely out of their depth. What followed was a week of utter embarrassment for the authorities. The hunt for Daniel Good quickly turned into a chaotic game of cat and mouse across the entire expanse of London. The disguised constables picked up his scent in Marylebone, an area dense with transient laborers and crowded tenements. But by the time the undercover officers figured out which boarding house he had slipped into, Good was already gone. They arrived to find a cold bed in a room that had been vacated just hours prior. From Marylebone, the trail went east into Spitalfields. This was a dark, suffocating maze of narrow alleys, open sewers, and deeply insulated working-class communities who inherently distrusted anyone wearing the Crown's authority, even if they were in plain clothes. The disguised officers stumbled through the fog, trying to blend in, but their rigid posture, military-style boots, and awkward questioning gave them away to the locals. Every time they closed in on a suspected hideout, the criminal underworld simply closed ranks, and Good slipped away into the night. The chase then lunged south across the River Thames toward the docks of Deptford. The police were constantly one jump behind. They were reacting to old information, rushing to locations where Good had been, rather than anticipating where he was going. Eventually, in the labyrinth of the Deptford docks, the trail went entirely cold. The disguised constables looked around at the crowded ships and the sprawling slums, realizing the devastating truth. They had completely lost him. The total disappearance of Daniel Good exposed a critical, structural flaw in the early Victorian justice system. The ad hoc experiment of sending disguised constables into the streets had utterly collapsed. The mistake wasn't just a tactical failure. It was a profound misunderstanding of the law's role in society. In 1842, the legal framework dictated that the state could only act against an individual after a crime had been formally identified and a specific warrant had been issued against a named villain. The police were legally designed to be reactive, muscle-bound enforcers, not proactive, intellectual investigators. Because of this, these disguised, uniformed cops were still acting like their uniformed counterparts. They walked into taverns and boarding houses in Marylebone and Spitalfields expecting someone to simply point to the killer and hand him over. They didn't know how to quietly interview witnesses to build a timeline, how to cross-reference geographic patterns of where a fugitive might find shelter, or how to analyze financial records and personal associations. The system had broken its own cultural taboo against plainclothes policing, but because it had no legal or operational framework for actual detection, it achieved the worst of both worlds. It panicked the public with the threat of state espionage, while completely failing to capture a dangerous murderer walking down their streets. The law had tried to adapt on the fly, but an untrained, uncoordinated police force proved to be nothing more than a blind giant stumbling through the dark. The complete disappearance of Daniel Good pushed London into a state of absolute furor. The press was ruthless. Newspapers openly mocked the police commissioners, printing satirical cartoons of clumsy constables tripping over their own feet while a killer walked free. The public's fear quickly turned into a deeper, institutional crisis of faith. For years, The government had argued that keeping the police visible and uniform-bound was the only way to protect the civil rights of free British citizens. But now, that argument was falling apart. The public realized that the law's refusal to build a smart, dedicated investigative unit didn't actually protect them. It left them entirely vulnerable to anyone clever enough to run into an alleyway. If the police could be completely outmaneuvered by a regular coachman, what would happen if London faced a highly organized wave of professional criminals? The turning point was the realization that a modern, industrial city of 2 million people could no longer be policed by medieval logic. Public safety was just as vital to a free society as privacy. The Home Office was backed into a corner. They had to formally re-engineer how the law operated or watch the entire justice system lose all credibility in the eyes of the people. And then came the ultimate embarrassment for the Metropolitan Police. After a week of intense scrambling, after breaking their own rules and flooding London's darkest neighborhoods with disguised constables, the police didn't find Daniel Good. The expensive, desperate undercover dragnet yielded absolutely nothing. Instead, the killer was undone by a regular citizen and a piece of paper. Good had managed to slip out of London entirely, fleeing into the rural county of Kent. He found work as a bricklayer's laborer, blending in with the local workforce under a false name. He thought he was entirely safe, but the police's failure had kept the case on the front page of every newspaper in England, and descriptions of his appearance had spread far and wide. A local man named Hosford noticed the new laborer. He realized Good's face matched the precise, detailed description printed in the daily papers. Hosford quietly notified a local constable, and Daniel Good was arrested without a fight. The twist was a bitter pill for the government to swallow. The entire controversial undercover operation by the Metropolitan Police had been a total zero. The system hadn't protected the public, a watchful citizen had. The failure proved once and for all that ad hoc, panic-driven police overreach didn't work. If the state wanted to truly solve crimes, it couldn't just throw regular cops into civilian clothes and hope for the best. It needed a permanent, highly trained, intellectual institution. Daniel Good was taken back to London, tried, convicted of murder, and executed outside Newgate Prison. But his real legacy wasn't written on the gallows. It was written in the architecture of global law enforcement. To prevent the public from completely losing faith in the legal system, Home Secretary Sir James Graham did what British authorities had resisted for decades. In August 1842, just months after the botched manhunt, he officially authorized the creation of a permanent, specialized unit within Scotland Yard. It was called the Detective Branch. Initially, it was incredibly small, consisting of just 2 inspectors and 6 sergeants. But their mandate was revolutionary. For the first time in British history, these men were legally permitted to wear civilian clothes permanently, not as a temporary panic measure, but as a professional tool to proactively detect crime, analyze evidence, and track suspects before an arrest warrant was ever issued. The paradox of the Daniel Good case is profound. The law had to witness a catastrophic failure of ad hoc police overreach to realize that a structured, legally bound body of permanent detectives was actually the only way to protect both public safety and civil rights. By creating a transparent, professional department with strict rules of conduct, the government finally removed the fear of an invisible, authoritarian spy network. They turned detection into a science and an essential arm of justice. Every time you watch a modern true crime documentary, read a legal thriller, or see a forensics team meticulously isolate a crime scene, you're looking at a system built on the mistakes of 1842. The modern detective wasn't born out of a brilliant stroke of institutional genius. They were born out of absolute desperation, public humiliation, and the dark, fog-choked streets of Spitalfields. The justice system had to completely lose a killer just to figure out how to find one.